We've got to talk about spies, and everybody likes to talk about spies. Everybody enjoys a spy story. Yesterday, it came out that 3 Bulgarian citizens who have lived in Britain for years and worked in a variety of jobs have been accused of spying for Russia, right? Nobody's quite sure exactly what they were doing. Orlin Rusov, Bizar Zamazov and Katerin Ivanova have been charged with possessing 19 fake documents with, in their words, improper intention. They include passports, identity cards and driving licence for the UK, Bulgaria, France, Italy, Spain, Croatia, Slovenia, Greece and the Czech Republic. They are accused of posing as journalists from American television companies. Scotland Yard is saying that they found forged press cards, clothing for the Discovery and National Geographic channels, which were used to carry out surveillance operations, and they apparently had targets in London, Germany and Montenegro. Sounds a bit like a James Bond film, doesn't it? Or maybe some kind of cut-rate Jason Bourne scenario. Alex, you worked in Brussels, and so you'd have to assume that some of the people you encountered in your time as an MEP may well have been on the old sort of side of the Iron Curtain and a bit of spying activity. Did you ever meet anybody who you thought might have been a spy?
No, well, do you know what? I did meet a guy who was the representative of Huawei who was knocking on everybody's doors like a madman, this little Irish guy, and I was like, what's he up to? You know, with 30,000 corporate lobbyists in Brussels, then there's going to be a few of them who are up to no good, and it's very targetable, isn't it? And we saw with Qatargate, didn't we, how easy it is, essentially, to shove money in a briefcase, give it to an MEP and get them to do their bidding. I think maybe what the other dodgy countries who want to infiltrate European politics don't understand is that the European Parliament is a useless place to do it because it's frankly toothless. It doesn't propose legislation, it doesn't amend legislation. But then that poses an even bigger risk, doesn't it? Because you've got multiple commissioners, EU commissioners, faceless bureaucrats who nobody knows who they are. They're the ones making the legislation. We all know that they're at the behest of the corporate cartel who essentially run Brussels politics, the big companies, the Unilevers, the Nestle's, who come out of all the bendy banana regulations to make sure they can't be competed with in the international marketplace. And we don't know how much vulnerability there is in the European Commission because these people are not scrutinised. And I think that's really quite alarming. But certainly for a very long time now, for decades and decades, the Cold War never ended when it came to spying and intelligence. We've seen attacks by Russians against their own agents on our soil. We know it goes on. And so this doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah,
I always tell the story, and I don't know whether I've ever told you this one, about where I was invited one time when I was foreign editor of Daily Express into the Foreign Office by a guy who is now actually an ambassador, and I'm not going to mention his name, but at that time he was head of press for the Foreign Office, and he became quite a powerful character. And he said, oh, you know, be good to meet you, come down, we're having a few people around for a drink. I got there, and if you've ever been in there, it's like this huge, cavernous, beautiful building on Whitehall, right next to the back of Downing Street, and they've got these big friezes and these sweeping staircases, and it turned out it was just me and like 5 of these characters from the Foreign Office. And as they gave me more and more wine, they started to say things like, you must see some interesting stories that don't make it into the paper. And I went, yeah. And they were like, maybe you could pass those to us. And I'm going, not really. No, I don't think I'd do that. And it was a very bizarre kind of 2 hours I spent with them. And I walked out thinking, I think they were trying to sort of tap me up to be a spy in some way, shape or form, because we did have, you know, foreign correspondents in places like Tirana when there was a sort of coup going on, and we did have people in Africa and who were sending us copy which didn't always make it into the paper. And it's a very murky kind of world, and you can I can see how you could easily find yourself in it without realising.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's true. And these people know how to operate, don't they? Double agents and people who are undercover. They can infiltrate many departments. They can end up working in MPs' offices and go undiscovered for a very long period of time. And I think that goes on in all countries, but probably none more so than the West right now, because essentially the Cold War never finished and the anti-Western alliance are upping the stakes, really, when it comes to grey zone warfare and the like. But, you know, one thing I do find alarming is I know a lot of people in the intelligence services, and I speak to them and communicate with them quite a bit on a personal level, not because I'm sort of operating for GCHQ myself, but I do know people who in the private sector of intelligence often say to me, the big issue we've got fantastic intelligence services in this country. We've got some of the best in the world when it comes to monitoring, tracking, having a handle on geopolitics and strategy. The big problem they have is the government don't listen to them. The intelligence services very sensible people like Sir Richard Dearlove have been saying for a long time, we've got to be wary of how many contracts we're doing with China.
Yeah.
And then the government goes and signs up for China to start building nuclear power, hands away our ability to manufacture electric vehicles here. And now there's the risk that electric vehicles manufactured in China could essentially be remotely controlled through Beijing, which is quite alarming what they could do on the roads. And the intelligence services, I think, very often are pulling out their hair because governments just think quick fix, must make money, must solve energy crisis because we've failed in this policy-making department for decades. So, we'll just get the Chinese to do it. That will please the voter.
Yeah.
And they open us up to
it's also the personalities. I mean, I read this morning one of the pieces about this Bulgarian spy ring that Chris Philp, who's a sort of in and out of junior government ministerial roles, was somehow the head of some espionage steering committee, which was supposed to keep an eye on stuff. This is a guy who, when he was working in the Justice Department, I asked him if it was illegal to wear a mask or illegal not to wear a mask on the tube. He didn't know. I'm like, you're in Justice Department. You're supposed to know if Sadiq Khan threatens me with arrest, is it actually illegal? He couldn't tell me. So you do worry that they put these kind of rather junior ministers who might not be imbued with a great deal of intelligence themselves in charge of intelligence.
Yeah, well, actually, the civil service mainly runs our government departments now. They've got the whip hand over minister, so I wouldn't worry too much about the competence of those people who are normally doing a job. I don't think we actually know the various people who hold all the power and have their hands on the tiller when it comes to who's actually running this country. But no, I mean, what we have as well is a situation where MPs have second jobs. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't be more vulnerable than being a politician who can actually vote on things, who might sit on a committee and can introduce certain legislation, who, if they're involved in cabinet work, then having business interests on the outside. I mean, that surely is ridiculous in the 21st century when you know how sophisticated international espionage is, when you know how far countries like China and Russia will go to try and control things.
Absolutely right. Speaking of incompetence, I mean, how much worse can this government get when it comes to trying to deal with the migrant crisis? I mean, it's literally gone from the really, really bad to the awful in about 7 days.
I mean, it's just going to get worse, isn't it? There is only one thing that could be done which would work, and they know it, and we know it, and everybody listening knows it, and that is to stop the boats coming over in the first place. If you had a situation where the boats got halfway across the channel and were sent back very quickly, it'd make headlines around the world. Yes, Rishi Sunak would look a little bit unpopular at the next UN hobnobbing. But do you know what? It would stop happening. All of a sudden, the French would get the message, we're not tolerating this. All of a sudden, the people traffickers would think, well, everyone's seen the headlines of the boats turning around, we're not going to get any customers anymore. And that would actually work. It worked in Australia. It worked in New Zealand. Yet what we had the other day, when we had those the poor tragic souls who died in the Channel, drowned just off the coast of France, the French Navy escorted them to our side of the Channel and went, ta-ta, then have a nice time, bon voyage, and then they died. So, I mean, this is the game the French are playing. And now the EU is saying, we're not going to have a returns agreement with you. They're politicising this and saying, well, because of Brexit, that means that if all these people are coming to you illegally because we have open borders and we didn't manage our frontiers, we're not going to take them back. And the EU essentially have blood on their hands because if they said, OK, we're going to work with you to stop these people crossing the Channel, people wouldn't cross the Channel, people wouldn't die in the Channel. And yet they clothe themselves in moral rectitude as if they are some sort of great Samaritan, and at the same time are saying no returns agreement. No way. You've got to be punished for Brexit. I mean, the people stuck in the middle here are people who are willing to pay people traffickers tens of thousands of pounds. Yes, a lot of them are opportunists. Yes, a lot of them are coming from dodgy countries. We don't know who they are, if they're the bad guy or the good guy. But there are also desperate people there, without a doubt. And the EU are exploiting the lot of it and essentially putting money in the back of international organised crime that funds drugs cartels, that funds terrorism. We've now learned that Afghans are competing with the Kurds to be the biggest people traffickers when it comes to this huge international exodus of people. Well, which Afghans do you think these people are? Do you think these are the Afghans that fought side by side with UK and US soldiers, or do you think these are the Taliban? It's probably the Taliban, and it's probably IS that we are actually funding right now by not dealing with this problem.
Exactly. And the problem with the EU is that they're not even uniform in the way that they treat other countries. For example, the Greeks are apparently now physically physically pushing migrant boats back into Turkish waters and leaving it to them. They basically do what the French do to us, and nobody's giving them a hard time for it. Poland is about to have a referendum on whether or not migrants should be accepted into the country, and the Polish are very unhappy with any kind of EU imposition of refugees. You know, meanwhile, Scandinavian countries are deporting people right, left and centre, as are Germany, saying that we won't allow anybody to claim asylum from Albania. You know, every country has got its own policy, but apparently they can't help us with ours.
Well, they've got to get a grip on this, don't they? Because this is actually a threat to European security. First of all, it's a threat to security because of infrastructure, because of overwhelming population growth, and what happens to society when you've got people from vastly different communities and cultures coming en masse to live within a country without fully integrating, when it's not organised and sensible and calculated inward migration. And then, of course, the ISIS didn't disappear. You know, it's not like, oh, ISIS just not being ISIS anymore, going to shave off my beard and get a job in the tax department. No, they didn't go anywhere. They're still operating.
Still got the black flag in the bedroom, waiting to bring it out, wave it around.
Yeah, those flags will be unfurled in time, definitely. And these people are the ones who are controlling the movement of people, exploiting people who are, you know, essentially refugees, genuine refugees in their own countries. But also, who else do you think they're putting on those boats? Probably their own operatives and terrorists. So we've got to get real about this. Europe has to get real. It all started when Angela Merkel went, come one, come all migrants. You can all come to Europe. You are all welcome, you know, and all those sort of Germans stood there with their refugees welcome signs outside stations. And now look what they've caused. Europe needs to deal with this. Europe actually probably, at this point, needs to put border checks in place. And it's not really that difficult, is it? The old infrastructure can easily be put back up. If you're going from one place to the other, you can do a spot check on vehicles.
Well, you might remember...
under fake recognition.
Yeah, I mean, you might remember, we've got to run, but you might remember when COVID came to northern Italy, guess what happened? The Germans shut the border to Italy and were like, nobody's coming through. They could do that tomorrow and stop all of this movement of people from every single part of the southern Mediterranean. Alex, listen, enjoy your holiday. We'll see you next week. Alex is going to join me next week at 9:30 every single day, and she's going to be filling in for Kevin O'Sullivan at 3 o'clock as well. Alex Phillips, former MEP for the Brexit Party, of course. Of course, she met spies. I've probably met some. You may have even met some. And if they're in Great Yarmouth, where else are they?